Chapter 7 Last of the Turtle Clan. It must have been around that time that war broke out among the white men. Joe's father had told him of the day-long canoe walk the shores at Turtle Cove. There he saw the great gathering of ships, said Joe. The red-coated soldiers covered all the beaches when that day ended. Joe was sure that Long Canoe had watched without knowing which of his many enemies were disembarking. Joe was also sure that he wouldn't have cared at all. One was as deadly as any other. Joe's knowledge of the Revolutionary War was probably scant at best, but he seems to have been referring to the landing made by British General Sir William Howe on the morning of October 12th, 1776, with some 30,000 soldiers. During that war, the grandfather of Joe had been born. He was called Red Dawn, in hope that a new era would rise with him. He married one of the few remaining young girls, and she was Morning Flower. They had one son and called him Eagle Feather. Eventually, Eagle Feather married the last Algonquin girl, Small Doe. They had a son, and his name was Two Trees. The name of the boy had been inspired by a small island just off the shore of Twin Island, near Hunter Island. During the boy's youth it was crowned with bushes, scrub, and two strong trees. The island was small, and it was alone. I think I understand why Eagle Feather and Small Doe chose it to name their son. Joe, for that is what I still called him, asked me to warm more tea. I did, and he sipped it slowly. He seemed a bit better than he had earlier in the day. His eyes stared into the small fire, and I wondered what sights they might be seeing. He was remembering and trying to visualize things he had never even seen. These were things that had been told to him as a story history of his people. The mind is very important to a people with no written language. He was recalling events that happened hundreds of years or more ago, in another time, another reality. I saw pain flicker across his features, and wondered whether it was caused by his illness or what he saw amid the embers. He seemed to find the images he searched for, and the story continued. He told again of the time his small family, last of the Turtle Clan, had been forced away by the white men. His father had not been able to come back until Joe was 13 seasons old. He counted these out for me on his withered fingers. Then his gaze found the opened medicine jar only recently taken from the stone cache. Reminded by his thoughts, he regarded it wistfully for a moment. During the time on the mainland, Eagle Feather had made short trips at first. He looked for other Indians. Over the years his trips had lasted longer. Finally, he had wandered around their camp of exile and cried much of the time. He had faced the facts. He and his little family were alone. The father made no more trips. Instead, he spent his time instructing Two Trees in the Indian way. He spent hours each day teaching the boy about his ancient heritage. At some point, the stories became Eagle Feather's life. He lived for the telling with Two Trees, the boy. Then, one day the boy came back and told his father they could return to the old place. The men had gone. The island could be their home once more. They could go back to the land of the turtle. The father seemed pleased, and they rolled their belongings into mats. Joe carried the bundles to the canoe, and the family paddled across Vagabond Bay. During the time of rebuilding the ancient camp, the father seemed better. His spirit returned, and he worked with a will. But the building and preparing didn't last long. When the camp was again as it had been, the father walked all the woods of the island. Again he was looking for Indian brothers. In time he knew he would find none, ever. He sat upon a rock and refused to eat. Joe tried to feed him, but 4 days later he was dead. There was no funeral ceremony, as in the old times. No one was left to bid farewell except a young boy and an aged wife. Two Trees took his father and, in the old way, buried him. He did all the work alone to spare his mother the sorrow of burying the last initiated Algonquin brave. He put many things in the ground: a hatchet, a knife, a stone pipe. He also placed the shell of a turtle in the grave. The turtle would be strong medicine during the trip to another place. There would be many camping stops along the Milky Way before his father reached the floating island. A 13-year-old boy and his very old mother were now the last of the Turtle Clan. The boy sometimes wondered if Teachee and Manitou might have forgotten that even they were left. He did what he could to make life easier for the old woman, but she was sick most of the time. Joe made tea and used the herbs and leaves. He tried all the remedies that had worked well in the old time, but nothing seemed to improve her. As hard as he tried, he knew he was losing her. She spoke bravely, and she counseled him not to worry over her, but each day saw her moving toward Eagle Feather. One morning, when winter was fighting off the advance of spring, Joe could not wake Small Doe. She had gone to join her husband. She had left her son behind. The mighty Turtle Clan had come to this. One man was left to bury his mother. One name was left to walk the old paths, to hunt the old places. One man was left to hear the sighing pines speak and ponder the glow upon the Milky Way. He was 15 years old. The man-boy did all the things that had become his routine. He tended the crops and hunted the dwindling game. He caught and dried fish and put the meat up for winter. He mended the wigwam shelter in expectation of cold winds to come. He hid from any passing eyes and cowered in fear a great deal of the time. He took to waking very early to walk the shores and hills before any other would be stirring. When winter came, he was confined to the small hut for great lengths of time. The snow seemed much deeper than when his parents had been alive to joke about his fears. He heard many noises in the night, and was often sure they were to be his end. The days, watching a tiny fire, went very slowly. That winter, Joe learned of loneliness. It was a predatory beast. It stalked him in the dark places. It waited just at the wigwam flat for him to come out. The beast hid behind every rock, every tree. It lived in all the places where laughter used to dwell. This was a very bad winter for Two Trees, and on occasion he thought of suicide. Then a warm day would come to chase the cold away, and Joe would decide to wait for the fawn to bring summer. So it went through January and February. March brought days when the boy thought summer must surely have come, only to have them smashed with sleet or snow. But after a very long season, green buds started to burst into leaves. Joe began to walk more now, and the pink apple blossoms kindled the embers in his heart. The fear left his spirit, and he was reborn with the new birth of spring. During summer, he did the things Eagle Feather had taught him. He worked at the corn, beans, and other crops. He prepared and put aside for the coming winter. He repaired the wigwam and made new traps and snares. He would often swim and wash himself with clean, wet sand. The fear was not gone, though. It still waited to trap him in the shadows of evening. He held it away with industrious work. He was preparing as he had done during every summer of his young life for the winter to come. Fall came, and Two Trees awoke one day to the knowledge that he must now pick the corn. He had waited this long only because he didn't want to acknowledge the loss of summer. He wasn't looking forward to the winter that would shortly come. Joe picked the corn and beans. He picked all his crops. He had soon put away a good store for the cold time. He stocked and prepared during the Indian summer, and when winter came, he was ready. His mother's baskets and clay jars were full to overflowing. The shelves were heavy with smoked fish. The firewood was piled outside his hut. Many nuts were stored in stone-lined holes around the campground. He slept, surrounded by his provisions.